Well, let's jump in. Um, Join me in a word of prayer and we will get started. Dear God, we thank you for the day. We thank you for the opportunities every day gives us. Just guide our minds and our hearts here today. Open them up to hear your words through this, and then uh, give us courage and patience and um, energy that we may serve you through what we learn. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen again. And I have fewer videos this time. An hour turned out to be a little shorter than I thought it was last
You want to turn it up a little more?
week. Can everybody hear me okay?
Pardon?
Okay, good.
Yeah,
I can
I
see.
just asked
According
John, he's going to turn it up a little bit more
Okay,
for us.
good. Yeah, according to this,
So we
there's
can hear you.
33. Good. There's 33 people or 33 logins here, and I can only see 25. So if you look at the bottom bar, bottom of the screen, there's a chat feature there also. That is probably the best way to ask a question or make a response is through the chat. Everyone can see that as long as they have that little chat thing pushed. And that way, the people I can't see, that helps. Something slightly ironic about having a discussion about systemic racism and not being able to see a portion of the people there. You can appreciate the irony as we move through. Okay, let me get set up here. All
Did
right.
you see the chat?
There we go. You should be able to see something that says welcome, combating racism, week 2, privilege and bias. So let me get the chat back. Okay. There, I got my control panel set up, so we're good. Okay, yeah, welcome, week 2. Last week, well, we'll do a little review of last week. I was surprised how effective the "this is water" metaphor was in describing the situation. Just like if you ask a fish how the water is, the fish is probably going to tell you what is water. They're just surrounded by it, but they don't really know what it is. And we are immersed in in the cultural forces of racism, and sometimes we don't recognize them, which is part of the objective of what we're doing here. Just as the fish doesn't know it's immersed, we're immersed. We talk about racism as not just an attitude individual people have, but as a systems of power, societal structures that back up those feelings of prejudice. So when, just to generalize, it tends to be when white folks think about racism, they think about the attitudes of particular individuals. Whereas people of color are looking at not just those attitudes, but also societal structures that back them up. And we saw Ijeoma Ulo, who wrote So You Want to Talk About Race. They're speaking with Jordan Klepper. And she was telling us that whether we realize it or not, we're always talking about race because the forces of racism really permeate all the aspects of our culture. I would think probably we're really talking about race a lot of times even when we don't realize we are. And like most cultural forces, you can be an active participant in racism or somebody that enables that or by inaction allows that to happen. An actor, an enabler, or a bystander, or maybe some combination thereof. We talked about race as a social construct that when Europeans began settling or colonizing and exploring the world, they were categorizing everything they saw, and that included people and racial features, in addition to skin color and facial features and hair texture, were also categorizing and setting up a hierarchy of people, with white at the top. The white were the colonizing powers, and those who were being colonized, it was considered a portion of their racial makeup that they were to be, that was their racial characteristic to be servants. and others had racial characteristics to be rulers. Nowadays, it's getting even harder to talk about the idea of race because we have people of mixed race parentage. The census was putting in questions about race and had to put biracial categories. And 6% of the people that answered last time said they weren't quite sure what race they were. I suspect race is going to be a harder way, more difficult way going forward for us to categorize something about our identity. That some people don't see themselves occupying any of those categories. We also saw a thing from Phil Vischer, the guy that gave us Veggie Tales, who was helping us answer the question, well, is this about class or is this about race? And the answer is some of both. And Phil Vischer went through some of the ways in which people of color were excluded from gaining family wealth, especially through home ownership, and different ways that people of color were excluded from economic opportunities and those tools and opportunities that allow us to have some kind of social mobility. And so one of the takeaways there, let's see if I have it, yeah, is that nothing is only about race and that nothing is never about race. It tends to permeate all of the conversations and interactions we have. So that was last week. This week, we want to talk about privilege and bias, and I want to show you just a short video. I think a lot of youth have seen this. I'm going to have to bring up this video. Do you see a YouTube screen? Just give me a thumbs up, folks. All right, good. And I should have shared the sound, so you should be able to hear everything. And let's.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learning more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
Okay. You've heard that saying about being born on third base and thought you hit a triple?
Hmm.
Yeah. Now, privilege is those sets of advantages that you have over someone else. Some of those which you had nothing to do with. One of the blessings and burdens I get in youth ministry is that when there are major national tragedies or events, I get to talk to students about it. And 2 weeks ago at the Capitol, well, 2 or 3 weeks ago, whatever, January 6th, it was on a Wednesday, so we had a youth meeting on Wednesday night. So I felt like we couldn't not speak about it. And so I did what I normally do when these things happen. We've done this with mass shootings, and we've done it with 13 Reasons Why, and other cases, George Floyd. And I just said, what have you heard about what happened at the Capitol today? And I had a group of middle schoolers, they're mostly 7th graders. And they were like, well, I think it was just one big case of white privilege. That was the first thing they said. I said, well, and I said what I usually say when they say that. I said, tell me more. And they said, well, I don't think a group of Black Lives Matter protesters could have gotten away with that. And that was their first takeaway from what I would have had. We did talk about other things like the electoral process and fair elections and those things, but that was their first thing. Some of you may have seen the pictures here. I hope you're seeing two pictures. One is a set of National Guards deployed during a Black Lives Matter protest. I think a lot of the social media that it was posted on led people to believe they were on the Capitol steps. They were not. They were on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And then the people who were rioting at the Capitol. It didn't take very long for these kind of pictures to show up on social media. And once again, it was the first thing like my 7th graders were talking about. As far as the George Floyd killing went, the weekend after that happened, George Floyd's death, I got a friend of mine named Marcus Jones. He is the campus minister at Midwestern State University in Wichita Falls. He's a popular youth speaker, and a lot of the people in our youth group know him because he's spoken at youth events before. And so we did a Zoom kind of like this, and we just talked. He talked about what it was like to grow up Black, and one of the things I asked him to do was to talk about the talk that young Black men get from their parents about what to do when they're picked up by the police. And so Marcus talked about when his parents gave him that talk. And Marcus has 2 sons, and they are old enough that they have gotten the talk from him as well. It came as a surprise to many of the students in the youth group that this parents needed to talk to their kids about this. That usually in white communities, the policemen are considered a source of security rather than a threat. But they got to see how another side views the police. One more example, somebody in a family discussion I was in asked me if Plano had a black mayor. And I said, yes, Plano does. In fact, here's a picture of him. This is Harry LaRosilliere. He's the mayor of Plano. He's been the mayor for a number of years. And this was a relative of mine, actually. He said, so Plano have a black mayor? I said, yeah, we do have a black mayor. He goes, well, I guess that's okay as long as he forgets he's black.
Oh,
And I said, do you have to forget you're white? And he was like, well, no, of course not. So another definition of white privilege is when you're allowed to forget what your race is. If you're allowed to forget you're white. If you go through a day and your racial identity has nothing to do with anything that you are being involved in, then that's part of white privilege. And that's something we wind up in many cases being born into. It is nothing that we've attained as a privilege. Based on my experience, the only time that I have really been conscious of my race has been when I'm in a situation where I am in the minority. If I'm in a gathering that has mostly people of color, I become more conscious about being white. So if we invert that, I think we get a better understanding of what people of color feel like every day, because they are going to be spending most of their day being around folks that don't look like them. So if you recognize what you felt like during those experiences, use that. Let that be part of your empathy towards people of a different racial makeup than yourself. One more thing about privilege, it tends to make you come from a perspective in speaking to other people that may seem insensitive. When COVID hit for real and we were all working from home, I was in a Zoom group. We met every other week with a bunch of youth workers in the area, youth directors, youth pastors, people who were responsible for youth ministry. We were trying to just share ideas about how we were going to do youth ministry in this new environment. I live in a 4-bedroom house. I have 2 adult children who don't live at home anymore. They're off, they have their own place, they have their own careers, living their own lives. So I have plenty of space. I am speaking to you right now from my daughter Rebecca's former bedroom, which I have taken over as a home office. Next door is my daughter Kate's former bedroom, which my wife has taken over as a craft room. And so I, being an idiot, said, oh, working from home is no problem at all. I just got my daughter's bedroom, and at the end of the day, I just leave, go downstairs and just, have an evening. Well, see, the thing that privilege blinded me to the fact that many of the youth workers out there are in their early to late 20s. They don't have houses, they have apartments. And so what they're doing is they're setting up work on the kitchen table, and then they have to clean all that off and put it somewhere so that they can have an evening, have supper, have the rest of the evening. In addition to that, some of them are married and they're sharing an apartment with a spouse who is also working from home. And both of them are there negotiating space on the kitchen table, trying to get their work done, and then put all that away and carry on with the rest of the time. I had a position of privilege, and it caused me to say some things that were really pretty insensitive to the situation of the people that I was speaking to. So there's times when we're going to put our foot in our mouth. There's times when we're going to have to stop and say, oops, I was speaking from a position of privilege. We talked about Be the Bridge groups last week. Part of the purpose of being the bridge groups is to help us understand what our privilege is and to be able to speak not insensitively out of privilege. But privilege is good for something. And what it's good for is that oftentimes the way we bring everybody else up is that someone from a position of privilege uses their privilege to bring other people in. If senior management someplace is a white men's club, then it usually takes one of those white men to bring women or people of color into the management suite. Yeah, if you're in a group with a person of color, I have heard stories and seen stories both about how the person of color gets questioned by the police or by the manager of the store or all those things more than white folks do. And it's good to say, this person's with me. We're shopping here and we just like to be on our way. We need to reach across our privilege and help bring people up. At the end of our time, I've got a little story of someone who is making excellent use of his privilege to help bring people up and help bring his white brothers and sisters into an understanding of race. So that's something to look forward to. Here we are. That's privilege. Those sets of things that we have that give us an advantage. We may not realize we had it. We may have been born into it. We may be so used to it. It's part of the water that we swim in that it makes us say things that other people find insensitive. It's not because we're trying to be mean. It's just because we're living in such a different world than they are, and we need to take a chance to step into their world. Implicit bias. What we don't think that we think. I want to start by talking about implicit bias with a little exercise. I'm going to mention a thing, a topic, and I want you to come up and without thinking, don't overthink this, because bias is about what happens when you're not thinking, what your first impulses are. I want you to think about something, come up with the first three or four things that come to your mind. And if I have to chat up, you can put some into the chat. Okay, I see. I'll work harder on my voice. Thank you, Ruth. It's kind of hard to talk without moving. We'll work on that though. That's my privilege. I can hear my own voice. I want you to think about koalas, little Australian koalas.
Mhm.
What are the first things that come to your mind when you think of koalas? Okay, yeah, I see cute.
Mhm.
Yeah. Australia, stuffed animal when I was little, cute, Australia, bamboo, fuzzy. Yeah, they actually eat eucalyptus leaves, soft. Yeah, somebody said claws. Very good, very good. Sweet, cuddly. The definition of bias is what you don't think that you're thinking. Yeah, ears. Very nice. Yeah, sweet, soft, fuzzy. A lot of teddy bears. If you saw that movie Sing, it was an animated movie, had a lot of music in it, and the hero was a little koala. Matthew McConaughey voiced this hero. Yeah, they are just pretty and cute and everything. But let me tell you something about koalas. They fight. Koalas are territorial animals, and if another koala gets on a koala's tree, they're going to have a fight. In addition to being territorial, they're territorial about females too. So when it's mating season, male koalas fight. And when you're a growing teenage boy koala and it's time for you to leave the nest, you're going to have a fight there too. Koalas fight. Yeah. Now, they have funny kind of hands. If you can imagine your hand, instead of an index finger, you have a second thumb. That's what a koala's hand is like. And at the end of those fingers are very, very sharp claws. Kate pointed that out. Makes it really easy to get up a tree, but your leg stands no chance against the koala's claws. I saw a YouTube video, and the sound and video quality were really bad, so I'm not going to show it. But it was some hikers that were coming across a wild koala. They were hiking, and this wild koala was following them. And one of the hikers was Australian. The two other hikers sounded like they were German or something. I'm not sure what it was, but it was phone video of these guys hiking, and the koala was following them along the trail. And the German guy was like, "Oh, look at the little koala. Oh, little bitty koala baby." And he starts walking over there. And the Australians were like, "Get away from the koala. He can take out all three of us." And the German guy was like, "You're kidding me. No, this little thing here, no." Gradually, the koala loses interest and walks off as they argue about whether or not they can come near a koala. Now, koalas are not inherently vicious animals. They are not out to get you, but they are wild animals. And like most wild animals, they have their own set of rules. And if they feel threatened, or if they feel like their cubs are being threatened, or if they feel like their territory is being threatened, they have the tools necessary to take care of the problem. But where did we learn about koalas? Where did we get all those messages about the soft, cuddly? Where did that German guy get the idea that koalas were something he could just walk up to and pet?
Television,
Yeah,
cartoons.
yeah.
How do I get on if I want to see advertising? I don't know.
I think we saw them on Mr. Rogers.
Yeah. Yeah. I see bringing him on the Tonight Show. Yeah.
Stuffed animals?
Yeah.
Yeah, he got.
Yeah. I mean, they do have, let's see here. They are cute. I mean, there's no denying that. They are cute. And yeah, we just really have gotten through fiction, through TV, through cartoons, and the fact that they're soft, and we are all like soft, fuzzy things, that we all think koalas are fun. Don't pet a wild koala. Buy a stuffed one and pet that.
I bet Australia started that rumor.
They probably did. Probably did. Someone pointed out Qantas Airlines has the koala on their commercials. So I bet you that there's a part of that. Come to Australia and see the cute koalas is why they put that in the commercial. Back in 2004, I was in Scotland, Glasgow, Scotland, and I was, European hotels have small elevators. They're smaller than elevators. So you're usually a lot closer to people than you normally would be, or at least Americans have a different space envelope than Europeans, I think, as far as just our tolerance for people standing near us. And I get in this elevator, this is 2004, and following me into the elevator were men who were clearly dressed as Muslims. And the first thing I did was tense up. I'm like, why? This is more than just people standing too close to me because the elevator is small. I just felt really like ill at ease, and nothing happened. We got to our floor, I got off, that was the end of that, and there you go. But years later, a guy named Juan Williams, you might remember this, Juan Williams worked for NPR and was fired from NPR for saying that he got nervous when he saw Muslim men on airplanes with him. Where do we get our ideas about Muslims?
From the media.
Yeah. Yeah. Movies. Yeah, I remember there was a lot of kids. So I was maybe G.I. Joe that had some, action figures of the good guys and the bad guys. And the bad guys were wearing the Arab headdress. And so they wound up pulling that toy and just inventing some kind of secret society that didn't look like it was any kind of ethnic group. Yeah, stories about terrorists, government laws that we should be afraid of them, fear sells. Yeah, movies. We get bombarded with messages about Muslims as well. And that forms opinions within us about how we should respond. Because koalas are soft and cuddly, we should respond by going and petting them. Because some Muslims are a threat, we should feel threatened anytime we're around any Muslim. Biases are those things that we incorporate into our mind, incorporate into our brain. It's like a shortcut your brain has. We're taking in information all the time. And as we take in information, we need to make decisions about what to do. And some brain paths that we have are well worn. And so when we get this stimulus, we do this response, boom, boom. We see a koala, we think soft, cuddly, let me go pet that thing. We see Muslims in elevators or airplanes, we think, oops, danger. Bias is part of our fight or flight mechanism. So biases themselves inherently are not bad. The question is, are the biases that you have, are they actually reflecting what your values are? There is I was listening to a podcast about gun culture. And I don't know if you've heard about Second Amendment checks, but there are people who will take large semi-automatic weapons and go to a public place with them just to see what is going to happen if they're going to be asked to leave or whatever, just how they're going to respond. They're meeting the letter of the law, and the weapons they have are not illegal to carry openly. They're not breaking the law. They're really testing to see what people are going to do with this display. So they're kind of putting their toes on the edge of the law. I read hearing in this podcast, they were interviewing and actually had a camera, not a camera, but a recorder during one of these times. And a man was at a public park with a large semi-automatic weapon. And the people at the park had called 911 and asked for the police to come out. And so they recorded the conversation between the policeman and the man who was there with the weapon. The policeman came over to talk to him, talked about the weapon. This weapon was a large weapon, apparently. I didn't see a picture of it because it was on sound. But apparently it lacked a certain feature that would have classified it as a rifle. So it was actually a pistol, which means maybe rifle and pistol might be social constructs or just legal things as well. And after going through all that, the policeman said, could you do me a favor? The next time you want to do something like this, can you notify the police? Let us know what you're out here doing, because there's a lot of people out here that want to enjoy a day at the park and you're scaring them.
Mhm.
Yeah. The idea of seeing somebody out in a public place with a large semi-automatic weapon activates a bias in your mind and you call 911. That's not necessarily a bad thing. However, when you're at a public park and someone of color approaches you and is talking to you about leash laws, that's probably not the time to call 911. It's kind of a difficult call because we do raise our children with stranger danger and we still retain some of that from our childhoods. But that's probably not the time. In fact, if these people had been people of color and someone called 911, we could have a discussion about how that would have turned out. Especially this last week after Tamir Rice, who had a toy gun, had been killed by a policeman. So the question we have about biases is not do we have them? We do, and we have them as part of the way our brain is wired. It's part of our function. The question is, do those biases reflect what our values are? And so Koalas, when they feel threatened, when you make them feel threatened, are going to react one way because they're wild animals, and that's just what wild animals do. They have their set of rules, and they act accordingly. As human beings, we have the capacity to stop and look at our behavior and examine it. We have the capacity to understand when we do something wrong, make mistakes, and the ability to do better next time. Dealing with issues of privilege and implicit bias, sometimes we are going to have to make those mistakes and learn those lessons and hope for some grace from the people around us. We saw from last week's video about the Be the Bridge group, how she said she had the verbal equivalent of having her feet washed by the people of color that she was talking to. We can create spaces where we can test out our privilege, test out our biases, and get some grace and some education and some ability to be able to examine who we are, what our behaviors are, what our values are, and bring our behavior into line with that. Let me figure out that. Okay.
Seems like
Yeah.
emotions have a lot to do with it too. If you drag fear in, people become irrational in a hurry.
Right.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. Being afraid can make you do irrational things. And really, the fear is the result of that bias. Your brain has told you you should be afraid. And there you go. Yeah. It's a risky thing. And it's a thing we're going to make mistakes on. We're not going to be perfect about this. But once again, this is we can create spaces where we can work on this and get grace from people who want this to be better too. Let's see, we have a responsibility to question our implicit bias. Yeah. For example, I have a good friend who, at the beginning of her career, she was responsible for maintenance at an aluminum smelter. She was the facilities person, and she's about 5'2". She's very small, and she went to go visit a vendor with one of her foremen who was about, 6 foot or something, big guy, a big guy who'd been in maintenance a while. And so when they went to the vendor, who do you think the vendor spoke to first? Yeah, spoke to the guy, and then turned to my friend and said, "So what do you do, little lady?" She said, "I'm his boss." So questioning about, maybe she just introduced yourself first. Maybe if someone is bird watching and is talking about leash laws, that maybe you should get the dog under control and ask him. I'm trying to think what you'd ask him. Actually engage him in a conversation rather than immediately calling 911. Yeah, we all have biases. It's a question, do our biases match our belief? If we believe in loving our neighbor as ourselves, and we have biases that push us away from our neighbors, then that's something we need to examine.
So, David, could you repeat that? The create space to examine our values and bring our behavior into that space.
Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about that, but.
Yeah, bring our behavior into line with our beliefs. Yeah. I am not so sure how we can do that without bringing people of color or marginalized people, handicapped, disabled, however you want to say that, the other into the conversation. I don't know how we do that without being vulnerable to other people. and letting them teach us how to recognize some of those things we do.
I guess I'm thinking about, excuse me, I have allergy to stuff.
Sure.
I guess I'm thinking about our own personal relationships, and that's where it needs to start.
Yeah.
In our homes, in our relationships with our significant others, our children, and so on. And from that, we should be able to bridge out.
Yeah. With our neighbors, people we work with the church tends to be a less diverse place. Maybe one day we'll be more diverse, but I think the key there is being willing to be vulnerable and finding accountability partners that are the other. Yeah, when I was in college, our Wesley Foundation was not very handicap accessible, and we learned a lot about what it's like to be handicapped. And the first person in a wheelchair went through and tried to use the facilities and come in and worship and just, you know, do the things the rest of us were doing. So yeah. And that is part of the future work that we have with the Combating Racism Task Force, is to enable us to be in conversations like that. Last week, we talked about lamentation, about the fact that there has been wrongs. Things have been wrong. We have done wrong. And the first step is to acknowledge it and grieve the wrong that has been done at the beginning. And we saw a result from one of the Be the Bridge groups about someone talking about that experience, about being vulnerable and about getting grace from folks that are not like her. Part two is confession. So let me tell you a couple of stories. I've got a great story at the end. A couple of stories. First one, some of you may have heard about this, the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the, well, this year is the 100th anniversary of the incident in Greenwood. Greenwood District in Tulsa was a all-black area of Tulsa. There was an oil boom going on, and people working in the oil fields, and it enabled the economic situation there, economic prosperity. It was raising up Black communities, and Greenwood became known as the Black Wall Street. Booker T. Washington referred to it as the Black Wall Street, held it up as a model of Black economic self-sufficiency. He used the word Negro, but you get the idea. There were doctors and attorneys and barbershops and a thriving middle class and upper middle class in Greenwood until March 31st, 1941. That day, there was a shoe shine, a guy who shined shoes, was accused of looking at a white woman and was arrested for that and taken down to the courthouse. Now, he was met there with a group of white men that wanted to lynch him. Word got to the African-American community up there in Greenwood, and they came armed as well to prevent that from happening. And as often happens when you have two groups of armed men facing each other, somebody shot. And I don't think anyone knows to this day who shot first, but it turned into a gunfight. And the gunfight turned into a white invasion of the Greenwood District. And for one evening, there was a lot of shooting and burning and looting throughout the district. And by the next day, Greenwood had been pretty well been demolished. I'm trying to find where it was. Yeah, Greenwood had pretty well been demolished. a lot of folks moved out of Greenwood for their own safety, and others were unable to rebuild because of city ordinances that made it difficult for Black people to get loans and to rebuild. In Greenwood, you could get a loan from a bank run by someone who's Black, but after the banks were torn down in Greenwood, you couldn't do that. And so Greenwood is still a part of Tulsa to this day, but it is not a very prosperous area. The economic collapse due to the riot just depressed Greenwood to this day for 100 years. So it was not much in the history books until about 1999, when the governor and legislature of Oklahoma opened up a commission to write a history of what happened at Greenwood. In 2013, the police chief of Tulsa issued a formal apology for what happened in Greenwood. This is part of what he said. I cannot apologize for the inaction, or dereliction that these individual officers and their chief exhibited during that dark time. But as your chief today, I can apologize for our police department. I am sorry and distressed that the Tulsa Police Department did not protect its citizens during those tragic days in 1921. I have heard things like, well, that was a different time. That excuse does not hold water with me. I have been a Tulsa police officer since 1969, and I have witnessed scores of different times. Not once did I ever consider that those changing times somehow relieved me of my obligation to uphold my oath of office and to protect my fellow Tulsans. Confession allows us to name and to acknowledge our part in what has happened. Opens up the doors for process of forgiveness. Has anybody heard of or visited the Whitney plantation? I've got a short little video about that. It was featured on the CBS this morning. And I want to show you, once I find it. There we go. You should be seeing another YouTube screen. Is that working for you? Okay.
Good morning. Well, about an hour's drive from New Orleans along the Mississippi River sits the Civil War era sugarcane plantation. The Whitney plantation looms as a stark reminder that our nation was built on the backs of slaves. It's a tough part of our history to remember, but one man is investing a fortune to bring it all back to life. This house is full of secrets.
They would sleep on pallets on the floors.
Beneath whitewashed ceilings, through quiet gardens, a dark history unfolds. Tourists peer into cages where slaves were beaten. Statues of Black children stare back at them. In this sanctuary, memorializing the harsh reality of slavery, one figure seems out of place.
Good to see you.
77-year-old John Cummings.
Most people operate on ready, aim, fire. And I always operate on ready, fire, and an aim.
16 years ago, the New Orleans native and millionaire trial lawyer jumped at the chance to buy this 250-acre plantation without really knowing what he was getting into.
Michael.
What didn't you know?
And I got to the slave part. And I saw some of the inventories from Successions. And I was looking, man, 40 people just traded like cattle. And so then I discovered the oral histories. And that's when the light went on.
I got something here.
Well, I've got a great injustice here.
Cummings decided to dedicate the entire plantation to the slave perspective. He spent $8 million of his own money collecting antiques and commissioning art. The vacant Whitney started coming back to life.
I tell people when they say, well, why is a white man involved in this? I'll say, well, don't you remember? It was a white man who caused all of this.
Here we honor the memory of 107,000 people.
To give it a voice, Cummings hired Senegalese historian Dr. Ibrahim Seck.
It is just amazing how these people.
Seck culled diaries and inventories from auction and estate sales. He found more than 100,000 names of slaves traded and sold through the Louisiana Territory. Each name is etched into these walls.
There is no order, just like it was total confusion, just like the lives of the slaves. So you have African names, French names, Spanish names.
Next to those names are the narratives of the slaves themselves.
Doesn't mean much, but we make them talk. It is just a way for us to give them a voice, because these people were voiceless people.
One of the voiceless, the powerless, was a slave girl named Anna who had a child named Victor. Victor was born a slave, but the records show he is the son of her white slave owner's brother. Victor's great-granddaughter is 82-year-old Sybil Morial.
We didn't talk about it.
Were they trying to save you?
Well, I don't know if it was shame, or maybe they were trying to save us. They didn't want to inflict that sad story on us. But it was sort of affirmed that my slavery ancestry was real, and it was only 3 generations ago.
Morial only recently learned of her direct lineage, of her connection to the Whitney, and of Victor's legacy beyond slavery.
He bought land and farmed it, so he overcame that life. And then the next generation did better, and the next generation did better, and then it's my generation, educated, successful.
Morial was a civil rights worker, a college vice president, and the first black first lady of New Orleans. But I already knew that. I married her son, Mark. How did you feel after you brought all of us together here?
I felt that I had given you, my family, the ancestry in color.
So my children now know.
They now know.
That they're great,
great,
great, great, great grandmother
was an African slave.
Knowing can be freeing, but most often here, it is painful. One of the last sights are these sculpted heads, replicas of 60 men beheaded for their role in a local slave revolt more than 200 years ago. But Cummings wants people to realize we aren't that far removed.
You look at the paper and you'll see that some militant group has decapitated a French journalist. And we all wonder what kind of barbarians could do that. We did that. Americans, we did that. Americans with white skin, we did that.
Do you feel guilty?
No, only if I don't do what I'm doing right now. Over half of the people who come in here cry, and I cry.
You still cry.
I do. And proud of it. It affects me. The injustice is there. You really can't do anything about it to change it. But maybe you can change some of the effects of it. And that's what I think I'm doing.
Just accepting that history can do that?
Owning it.
Perhaps John's most important point is that we, even today, are still living with the effects of slavery, poverty, illiteracy, and crime. And he's on a campaign to not only provide a quality education in his state, in Louisiana, but he thinks it's really important that everyone who can go to college and who can't afford it gets to go for free.
What a story.
Yes,
oh my
bravo,
God.
Mr. Cummings.
This morning.
Trying to get back to where I was. Let's see here. There we go. Okay.
We don't know the half of what went on.
Yeah. Powerful story. A process of confession. allows us to name what has happened, what we have done, what we've been part of. It's a vulnerable thing to do. Just as a vulnerable thing to do is to examine your privilege and understand what you've said that comes out of that privilege may be harmful, or the perspectives you've got that come from your privilege may be harmful to someone else. And that the bias that you've got, those snap judgments you make, those first impressions that you have that have been wired in, need to be rewired, need to be re-examined. All these things require vulnerability. All these things require some kind of reconciliation. Next week, we'll talk about cultural competence and forgiveness and reconciliation. And then the following week, talk about being an ally and repairing. It's 7:30. Any questions, comments? Complaints? Okay, let me just ask a couple of quick questions. We don't need to go into a lot of detail, but did anybody see the movie Get Out? Yeah. I had to sit through that movie. The movie it's a horror movie, but it's more suspenseful than it is bloody. And I sat through about 2/3 of that movie before it dawned on me what the racial overtones were in the movie. I thought if you haven't seen it, and once again, it's not a very bloody movie. I don't like bloody movies, but this is more of a Hitchcockian type suspense movie. I thought it was pretty eye-opening. Okay. If there are no other questions, see you back at this place at this time next week. And Cake, I asked you to pray us out last week. Could you do it again this week?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Let's pray. Oh God, you see the children who have gathered here, your children, how we are siblings, how we struggle, our mixes of emotion and shock and shame and disbelief at what our brothers and sisters have done to one another, all of our siblings over the many centuries. We cannot help but ponder our role in that, in the many different levels of severity that can occur even now. And Lord, I thank you for the privilege of being together here and being led. And we thank you for David and his leadership, and for hearts willing to take the time to listen and do this hard work. And I ask you to be with each one here tonight to make us aware of your presence in us, and to help us have the courage to stay focused on what we have to ponder and what we have to learn, and also the forgiveness and grace that you offer. Teach us to lament, teach us to confess, teach us to have grace with one another, and most of all, Lord, teach us truth. Help us face the reality of the world that you have created and our place in it. And I pray all these things in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Youth Chili Fair is Sunday. Eat some chili.
Yay.
Thank you.